Kensukes Kingdom. Continuing from page 136. Later that afternoon, we set up sticks in the sand for a goal and took turns at shooting at each other. The ball was very soft, and so it didn't bounce any better on the sand than it had back on the mud of the recreation ground back home. But it didn't matter. Kensuke may have carried a stick. He may have been as old as the hills, but he kicked a football well enough to put it past me, and often too. What a time we had! Neither of us wanted it to end, with the crowd of bemused orangutans looking on, with Sheila interfering and chasing after every goal scored. We were at it till darkness. Darkness drove us at the last back up the hill. We were both too tired to do more than have a long drink of water, eat a banana or two, and go to our sleeping mats. It was after our reconciliation that I came to know Kensuk better than I have ever had before. His English became more and more fluent, and he clearly loved to speak it now. For some reason, he was always more happy to talk while we were out fishing in the outrigger. We did not go out that often, only when the fishing was so poor in the shallows that we needed to catch a big fish for smoking and keeping. Once at sea, the stories simply flowed. He talked a great deal of his childhood in Japan, of his twin sister, and how the worst thing he'd ever done was push her out of a tree in the garden, and how she'd broken her arm, and how when he painted that cherry tree he always reminded him of her. But she too had been in Nagasaki when the bomb fell. I remember he even told me the address of where he lived when he was studying in London. Number 22, Clanricarde Gardens. I've never forgotten it. Once he had gone to watch Chelsea playing football, and afterwards he sat astride in London in Trafalgar Square and been ticked off by a policeman. But it was Kimmy and Micaiah he talked of most, about how he wished he could have seen Micaiah grow up. Micaiah, he said, would have been nearly 50 by now if the bomb hadn't fallen in Nagasaki, and Kimmy would be exactly the same age as he was, 75. I rarely interrupted him when he was like this, but once to comfort him I did. Bombs don't kill everyone. They could still be alive. You never know. You could find out. You could go home. He looked at me then as if it was the first time such a possibility had ever occurred to him in all those years. Why not? I went on. When we see a ship and we light the fire and they come and fetch me, you could come too. You could go to Japan. You don't have to stay here. He thought about it for some time, but then shook his head. No, he said, they are dead. That bomb was very big bomb, very terrible bomb. Americans say Nagasaki destroyed every house. I hear them. My family dead for sure. I stay here. I safe here. I stay on my island. Day after day we piled more and more wood on the beacon. It was massive now, bigger than ever. Bigger even than the one I had built on the watch hill. Every morning now, before we went down to the pool to wash, Kensuk would send me up to the top of the hill with his binoculars. I always scanned the horizon, both in hope and in trepidation. I longed to see a ship, of course, I did. I longed to go home, but at the same time I dreaded what that would mean. I felt so much at home with Kensuk. The thought of leaving him filled me with terrible sadness. I determined to do all I could to persuade him to come away with me, if and when the ship came. At every opportunity now, I talked to him of the outside world, and the more I talked, the more he seemed to become interested. Of course, I never spoke of wars and famines and disasters. I painted the best picture of the world outside I could. There was so much he didn't know. He marveled at all I told him, at the microwave in our kitchen, at computers, at what they could do, at camcords flying faster than the speed of sound, at men going to the moon and satellites. These things took some explaining, I can tell you. Some of it he didn't even believe, not at first. The time came when he began to quiz me. In particular, he would ask about Japan. But I knew very but I knew very little about Japan, only that back home in England, lots of things, including our microwaves, had made in Japan. Written on them, cars, calculators, my father's stereos, my mother's hairdryer. I made in Japan, person, he laughed. Very old machine, still good, still very strong. Trying as I did to trawl my memory after a while, I could find nothing more to tell him about Japan, but he would still keep asking me, You sure there's no war in Japan these days? I was fairly certain there wasn't, and said so. They built up Nagasaki again after the bomb. I told him they had, and I hoped I was right. All I could do was to reassure him as best as I could, and then tell him the same things I did know about over and over again. He seemed to love to hear it like a child, listening to his favourite fairy story.